first video ever of Fashion Fridays. So if you couldn't tell, every Friday we're going to be talking about fashion, whether it is tutorials or I'm just going through hauls and showing you tools or fabrics, talking about fashion industry issues, or just kind of talking about like the process of fashion, like how do you come up with your designs, how do you make the patterns, and then going through like sewing it type of thing. So my name is Hannah. That's what my channel's name. That's why it's called Hannah's House, because it's my house. I can do whatever I want, you know. Even though we are going to be talking about fashion, I do have like other, I guess, shows you could call it, that I am working on, that I want to be putting out on different days. So yeah, but for this series it is fashion only. Fashion brain turned on. I guess a bit about how I got into fashion. It's something that's always been present in my life. Like my grandmother sewed. I have like great aunts and things like that who did it for a living. So it's just always been in my life. My family's just really creative in general, and fashion is definitely a very creative industry. So I was kind of drawn to it. I took it as an elective in grade 10 and I loved it. There were obviously a lot of challenges because it is very creative, but fashion can also be very technical, you know, trying to make sure things fit right, how do things attach together, that kind of thing. Excuse me, sorry. But for the most part, I was just in love with the creative process of like making something from start to finish, coming up with an idea, finding the fabric, what kind of pattern do I need, that kind of thing. And I love the confidence that clothes can bring people, so that's also something that drew me to it and even kind of made me consider it as a career. I took it again in grade 12. There wasn't a grade 11 course because there wasn't enough people for the class. So I took fashion again in grade 12 and I got to learn more things, and I thought I couldn't like it anymore, but I was wrong and I ended up going to school for it. So I just graduated from my 2-year program in fashion design and I loved it. There were so many things that I never, like different industries that I never considered. Like, yeah, there you can be the fashion designer, but there's like making fabric. Somebody has to make that fabric, or making patterns, you know, the ones that we just buy in the store, somebody has to make those. So going to college, for me, I realized how many different avenues I could pursue with fashion and still be in a creative space. So that's something that I enjoy and I think was freeing, because like you never know where you're gonna end up, especially as we've seen today with everything going on. Like you never know where life is gonna take you. So it's nice to know that I have a lot of options and I don't have to leave the industry that I enjoy. What else? Yeah, like I moved to go to school, so that was like a hard thing as well, but I think it was well worth it. There are obviously pros and cons when it comes to school, because at the end of the day school can be very stressful, but I enjoyed myself and I learned a lot. So that's kind of the point of today's video. I just want to show you like some of the tools that you use in the fashion industry. There are so many, but I'm specifically going to be kind of talking about the ones that I know. So with sewing and pattern drafting, and yeah, let's get into it. So first, obviously when you're sewing, you're going to need a sewing machine. Mine is a Singer Prelude and I've had this sewing machine for 7 years and it works great. I got it at Walmart on sale. So sewing machines, you don't always have to cough up the big bucks, but if you're gonna take it super seriously, then it wouldn't be a bad idea maybe to get some with a couple of extra bells and whistles. But yeah, so just make sure, if you just want to get a basic one, sorry, if you're not sure if you're interested in fashion or you're just starting out, just make sure it has the basic like button attachments, and it can do a couple of other stitches, not just a straight stitch. So maybe something like a zigzag stitch for sure. With your sewing machine, you are going to need bobbins. So this metal one, in college we used like industrial sewing machines, like the ones you're gonna find in factories, so that would be the metal ones. But whereas on the Singer, which is what we call like domestic, so ones you can just pick up at Walmart, focus, you use plastic bobbins. So bobbin literally is just a circle piece of plastic or metal that you can wrap your thread around, and it's the piece you need in your machine so it can sew. And most important, a bobbin case. This is what you put your bobbin into. and then you put this in the machine and now you're sewing. So remember it. It comes with your sewing machine, but I just feel like I should mention it because of how many times I have misplaced mine or like forgotten mine at home and I was on my way to school, because showing up to your machine and realizing that you can't even sew, it hurts. Thread, there you go. I feel like we all know what thread looks like. This camera doesn't like me, but thread is easy. Make sure it matches your fabric unless you want like some kind of contrast. Other than that, like, just make sure you don't forget it. Patterns. So you're going to need to know what pieces you need to cut out of your fabric, or like what size they should be. Like if you are size 6, the pattern is not going to be the same size as if you were making something for a size 8. So patterns are very helpful. So when I was first starting out, like in high school, I would just go to Fabricland or online and you can just buy one. And there's nothing wrong with that. There are so many different type of patterns, so whatever you're trying to make, you could probably find something for it. But in college, we learned like how to make our own patterns. So that was something that I like, because I'm always trying to do things outside of the box. So just to know that if I can picture it, I can make it. If you learn to understand the basics of pattern making, then you can make yourself whatever kind of pattern you want, and I love the freedom that comes with that. So yeah. So speaking of patterns, you're definitely going to need paper, a lot of paper. With patterns, it's going to be a lot of drawing, erasing. Okay, now you have a pattern, now you have to make a sample, try it on, see what fits, what doesn't fit, go back to your pattern, editing, a lot of editing I guess with pattern making. So you can do it on the computer, but their programs for it are super expensive. So sometimes you just got to do it old school, save that cash. So yes, I took so much paper because I remember it was March and they were like, COVID was kind of just like getting more traction here, I guess. So people were kind of like, yeah, like especially the teachers, they were like, just in case, take all your stuff home with you over the March break because they might be closing the college, what we thought was going to be temporarily. So I literally took so much paper, wrapped it up. You should have seen me trying to get on the train to come home with all that paper. But at the end of the day, I'm glad I did, because I didn't end up going back to school. Like I went back to my dorms to get my stuff, but I couldn't actually get into the school. So I would have been paperless, and that is a struggle. That would have been a struggle. Moving on. Since we're already on patterns, I'll just talk about some of the other tools that you use like with pattern making. So that would obviously be like your pencils, preferably mechanical pencils, because with pattern making you need to have a lot of like precise lines. I hate mechanical pencils. I write so hard, I snap so many leads, but at the end of the day it's worth it because you can get the most accurate lines, and in pattern making it can be the difference between your pattern fitting or not fitting. And then markers for labeling. You know, a lot of pattern pieces, some of it can look identical, so just label all your stuff. It helps later on down the line if you want to reuse a pattern, you know exactly what piece you're looking at and what it's for. A notebook, I would say, like for the pattern drafting and for sewing, because sometimes things don't go right, maybe you need to edit something. So just constantly be writing notes, constantly marking down where you're at and what you're doing, so that at any point in time, if you have to walk away and come back, you know what's going on. Tape is your best friend, because with pattern making, again, I said it's a lot of editing. So sometimes, oh, your paper's too small, you have to tape some on, or maybe you have to cut a piece off and tape it to another piece. You know, sometimes with your rough draft pattern you end up with a Frankenstein looking thing, but it's okay, you know, because you can always trace it again, have a good copy. But tape really is a lifesaver. A tracing wheel. You know, if you're doing an asymmetrical design, it saves time to just draw the one half, fold it onto the other half of paper, and trace it, because some things you're gonna need the whole pattern piece, right? So this tracer is a lifesaver because it just cuts down on time. It makes it a lot easier to get through designs, because again, I can just do one half, trace the other, Okay, so on to the next thing. This is an awl, and it literally is just a metal stick that has a sharp end so you can poke things. This can also be used for tracing. If you have a smaller piece, sometimes you can just kind of poke the corners and draw it in, and it's also used to mark things on your pattern for labeling purposes. The next item would be a notcher. So it literally is just like a puncher, and there, you just do, if it'll focus, you just do that with it. And again, this is just another tool that you use to mark certain things on your paper, on your pattern, sorry, so that you know how it's supposed to go together. Basically, that's, yes. If you're confused about any of this at any point, this is kind of a brief like overview of the tools. I'm not really so much talking about the functions, but if anybody is interested in like more in-depth tutorials on how to make your own pattern or how to sew certain things, let me know. I'd be interested in kind of going over things like that. So yeah. Oh, last but not least, an eraser. It might seem obvious, but again, these are kind of things that like I've just forgotten in the past, and it can just be really annoying when you've messed up a whole line or section of your fabric, section of your pattern, and you don't have anything to erase it with. Paper scissors. Keep them separate. You have your fabric scissors for your cutting your fabric, your paper scissors for cutting your paper, and this basically just prevents your scissors from getting dull. Rulers. So many rulers. Rulers can help when you're tracing your pattern onto your fabric, but they also mainly help in making your actual pattern, because you have to get your measurements right or it might not fit properly. So that's just a straight ruler, and then this one is a curve. We use this for like hip curves because it kind of is like that shape, so that's what we use to get that done. These are other ones. These ones don't have measurements on them. They're more so for getting certain shapes right. Sorry. For the hip curve, you can also use this for if you're doing like your waistline or your hems, you want to make sure it's even. Whereas these are more for, again, like getting the shape right. So like your sleeve cap, that kind of thing. If you're measuring here or trying to get like that underarm shape, these are great for that. And then this is another one, which is again more so for getting the shape, so a neckline, a collar, that kind of thing. And this ruler, honestly, I show up to school without this ruler and I can't pattern draft. Like, you use this so much because again, pattern drafting is precise. Sometimes, you know, you can just wing it, but with certain things, like, don't take the risk. So this pink ruler really is like, it is your life. It is your life in pattern drafting. I don't know how well you can see it, but it has like the different sections, so you can get down to like the 16th on a ruler, and I have had to do that. So yeah, it has inches, centimeters, you can get down to millimeters even with this ruler. So if you're going to go into pattern drafting, make sure you have a ruler that has as many measurements on it as possible. A measuring tape. You're going to need that more so for like measuring your model or yourself, just so you know like what sizes you are going to need. But yeah, measuring tape, very important. Now onto some of the stuff you're going to use more when you're actually sewing. That would be things like pins. I have a lot of pins. Be careful, you can drop them on the floor and not notice and you're stepping on them. More so at home because I don't wear shoes in my house, so I'll drop pins and then be walking across the floor and I'm getting stabbed. So just keep an eye on your pins. Get a pin cushion, because then you're sewing, you can just pull them out as you're sewing and stick them right in there. You don't have to worry about, oh, putting it on the table beside your sewing machine and they fall off. And last thing to say about the pins, check the sharpness of them. This might like seem annoying, but if you go to use a pin and it's dull, just make sure you throw it out right away, because if you keep using that dull pin, what could happen is when you're going to push it through your fabric, it could catch and now you have a run or a tear in your fabric, and you might have to even recut that whole piece because there's a very ugly like run through it. chalk or wax. So this is for tracing your pattern. You can sometimes just pin the pattern right onto your fabric and then cut the shape out that way, but it can be hard to get it accurately. So sometimes the best thing to do is just to weigh it down and trace over it. I don't know if it's gonna focus, but it's just a piece of wax and then a piece of chalk, and yeah, just trace it. I prefer to use chalk because with chalk you don't have to worry. Use water, it rinses out, but with wax, double check to make sure it'll rinse off of your fabric, because with some fabrics, it doesn't matter if you wash it, the chalk is not going to leave. And if it's a drastically different color from your fabric, you might be able to see it on the good side, and well, it might not look nice, you know, and then you spend all that time and you can't even wear your garment. So a seam ripper. You make mistakes, you have to rip them out. This is going to be your best friend, even though it might be super annoying whenever you have to use it. Hand sewing needles. You can't get away with doing every stitch on the machine. Things like buttons, you're gonna have to hand sew. So just try and get different like lengths and things like that, because it can make it easier depending on what you're sewing. These are the fabric scissors I was talking about. These are very sharp, and that's good because, and they're large too, so you can get nice clean cutting lines. Your fabric isn't going to be all jaggedy or frayed, and you just don't want that, because one, it can make it harder to sew, and it can mess up your seam allowance, which isn't good, because if you need to make it bigger or something, now you can't, because the fabric in your seam allowance, it's not looking pretty. So you don't want that showing on the actual garment if you had to make it bigger. Glasses. I hated wearing these goggles because they get like so scratched up, I really can't even see properly. So sometimes I wouldn't wear it. Most of the time I wouldn't wear them, but I will warn you, when they say that pins can sometimes like snap off and come flying at you, or even like the needle on the sewing machine can snap off and come flying at you, it is very true. I had a close call. My eye survived. It didn't go in my eye, but it just went way too close to comfort to my eye. I still didn't wear the goggles after that, but just a warning, you know, understand why they tell you to wear those goggles, because they are not lying. They are not lying. The things would be like safety pins. Safety pins are good for putting in elastics, or if you sewed something, you want to make sure it fits, you can use pins. If it doesn't fit, sorry, maybe you have too much fabric, you can just use the pins to section it off, so you know how much you have to take off when you're resewing. Things like buttons, obviously a common, you're gonna have to close up what you're wearing somehow, or you can use zippers too. Metal or plastic, either one works, but I will say, if you're going to get metal, make sure it is the right size for your garment, because you can't cut a metal zipper or sew through a metal zipper. But with a plastic zipper, say if it was too long, I could just cut it and then sew across, and now I have a new zipper that fits whatever I made. But you can't do that with a metal zipper, so just something to note when you're choosing one. Elastic comes in different colors and widths, and sometimes if you don't want to use like a button or a zipper, you could just make it elastic waist, or if you need something to fit a certain way, elastic. Hook and eyes. You kind of see these on evening wear sometimes, or like hook and bars where you have the zipper, then right at the top there's like those. So that's what hook and eyes are good for. Yeah, honestly you can kind of use them anywhere, but that's just where you see them most. And then we have snaps. These are really small, but they're again like all different sizes. So yeah. So that is everything that I have used a lot when it comes to like sewing or pattern making. So yeah, I just thought I'd share, you know what I'm saying, for anybody who's interested in fashion and what kind of goes into the industry, what kind of tools you might need if you're interested in starting sewing yourself. just a little FYI on some of the stuff you might need. So I had a lot of fun going through all of this, and I cannot wait to see you guys all next Friday when we're going to be talking about something else, but just be sure it will be fashion related.